In a world where people disagree, two guys, one podcast. Two guys who disagree about stuff.
Trevor, it's good to have you again. How are you, man?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. Just had spring break. Went up to Salt Lake City. Had a lot of takeout. It was pretty fun.
Oh yeah, what was the best takeout you had?
The best and most expensive takeout was Takashi sushi. It was pretty amazing.
Okay, what rolls did you go for?
You know, we had something called the mermaid roll. It reminded me of Little Mermaid, so that was disturbing because I was thinking of eating talking fish. But
Ariel.
other than that, the experience was good. That was pretty
That's
delicious.
good.
Non-political question of the week. Oh, sorry.
What was the name of that sushi place in St. George? They had a roll named after your dad, didn't they?
Sakura. That's Sakura. They
Yeah.
still do. They still have the stock roll. Yeah,
The stot
indeed.
roll. That's so fun. I remember going there and ordering that and just thinking, that's my coach.
He ordered so much sushi, they named a roll after him. Yeah. Non-political question of the week. What's your favorite food?
You know, I'm kind of a seafood guy as far as I see food and I crave it kind of a deal.
Okay.
A little bit. So I can't answer that question very well. What about you?
It's tough. It's hard to narrow it down. I really like curry. I like stuff that has rice, and then you put stuff on the rice. I love that kind of food. So
Okay.
Thai food,
Yeah,
Indian food.
I have a soft spot for a good peanut sauce.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so this week we're talking about guns, an issue nobody is divided on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty tame.
Pretty
Tame by our
I
standards.
don't hear anyone getting animated about this.
No, not one soul. How do you feel about guns?
Guns. I'm of two minds. On one level, they're super cool. On another level, I don't know if we're better off with the amount of gun ownership or type of gun ownership that we have. I'm in favor of more restrictions on gun ownership.
Okay, so on one hand they're cool, but on the other hand they're scary and probably too numerous.
Yeah, I guess that sums it up.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I am on the, I wouldn't call it anti-gun control. Maybe I'll call it pro-gun. I don't know, but I'm not super pro-gun personally. You know, I don't own a gun for a number of reasons. Have young kids, they're super curious. I don't have any good place to store a gun personally. I don't get a lot of utility or enjoyment out of shooting it. And so therefore I don't invest time in becoming comfortable and proficient in operating a gun.
Yeah.
So, I personally don't own one. I don't know if I will ever have one in my home. Maybe. I'm not going to completely rule it out, but it's not something that excites me by any stretch or by any means. But at the same time, it is a right that I think should be preserved. And yeah, any restrictions that are placed on guns or anything of that nature, I would like to have be as minimal as possible.
Yeah. It's a very American issue, I think. I don't know of any other country where this debate is at the level that it is here. Certainly there's gun ownership in other countries. We're the country that owns the most guns per capita. We produce a lot of the world's guns. And I think owing to our history, owing to the Second Amendment, the frontier culture, when, guns are a huge thing here. It's ingrained in the culture. People, yeah, and I think another very American problem is mass shootings. I think if you look at it, most of the mass shootings of this type that happen in the U.S. They happen quite frequently, where basically one person, for whatever reason, wants to kill a bunch of strangers usually, just and this kind of attack is pretty much always what frames the gun debate in America. As every year or so, one of these shootings or more will happen, and then people start talking about it, and the left will come out and ask for more gun control, and the right will come out and say no, fighting over that.
Yeah, and when I think about the topic of mass shootings, there are two things. And before I get to those two things, obviously I think that everyone agrees, yeah, death is really sad, especially when it's a person inflicting that death upon another person.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's inexcusable.
Right.
With mass shootings, as you alluded to, being the framing of the conversation, here's why I get a little bit uncomfortable with it. Number one is I don't care what instrument of death is being used to massacre all these people. I just care that it's happening, number one. So, if you look at mass shootings in the United States, do we have more of them? Maybe, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But, there are more mass stabbings, for example, in other countries. And so the statistic that I would care the most about isn't so much mass shootings as much as it is mass homicide. And
Sure.
and that's what I would be interested in. And I don't have statistics, obviously. And we're really not a debate or statistics show. So I don't even want to go down that road. But that is something that I would feel a little bit more comfortable talking about, is the mass killings more so than the mass shootings. But then secondly, how do we define mass shooting? Like, do we even agree on what that means? Like, I don't know what it means. Or
Yeah.
when somebody's saying, oh, we had 6 mass shootings last year, or we had 20 mass shootings last year, whatever the number
But
is.
you could define it in different ways, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. You could define it as, for instance, a shooting of 3 people. So sometimes I think when they talk about how many mass shootings there's been, they're also talking about, for instance, shootings of 3 people, something like that, which is a tragedy, but maybe not the same thing as we think of, I think, in the popular imagination of a mass shooting. I would say that, yeah, there are different ways to kill lots of people. There's also bombings, the Oklahoma City bombing, for instance. There are
Yeah.
places that have a lot of violence. That's true. There are places, war zones, that have this kind of thing. But I think this phenomenon where we're constantly having this style of attack is American. Generally, it has happened elsewhere, but I think because of the prevalence of guns, I mean, that's really the difference. Why are there mass stabbings there and mass shootings here? It's because we have guns. No one's
Sure.
going to do a mass stab. Not going to bring a knife to a gunfight here. And yeah, you obviously there's other ways to kill people, and obviously it's a small amount of people that are killed by these kind of incidents. I don't mean insignificant. I don't mean to say that it's not important, but obviously a lot more people are just killed in one-on-one homicide and things like that, of course. But I think these are dramatic. I think it's almost like this is something that happens in America, presumably because we have so many guns. And maybe it's not the worst effect of guns, or even representative of the entire effect of gun ownership in America. But I think it serves as a symbol for the debate, and maybe it's not the fairest one. There might be other statistics that would be more logical to discuss on it. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either. I think that with this topic, neither one of us considering ourselves experts, neither one of us being, gun owners, or really this being the issue that's the most important to us.
Yeah.
I think that it may just make more sense to go straight into our questions and
Yeah, let's do it.
kind of get in there. So I guess for you, what is either yours or the left's primary driver for the desire for gun control or gun restrictions of any kind?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think I think the idea is that America has quite a bit of gun violence. I mean, that's not really a controversial statement. There's a lot of it. I think the idea is that if there were some kind of controls, some kind of, I don't know, background checks, more background checks, something, or maybe a change in the type of guns that could be owned or who can own guns, that this would reduce the violence. I think is the idea, and I think that yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. So I guess to what degree do we feel like those things would decline if there were greater restrictions or obstacles in place towards gun ownership?
You know what I'd say is I won't say that all of the violence and all of the crime in America is because of guns,
Sure.
because it's not. It really isn't. I think they do allow for violence to happen in ways that are more, I don't know, maybe I would argue deadlier. It's easier to shoot multiple people than it is to stab multiple people. I mean, it's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Would murder go away? Would crime go away? No. And I think that America, on top of having a lot of gun ownership, we also have other issues that cause high rates of violence. We also have war on drugs. We have a society with historic inequality. These factors are driving crime, and guns are enabling the crime to a degree, but they're not the thing that's creating it. I think that
Mm-hmm.
idea that the right says, like, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I don't mean to sound like the NRA here, but that's not a completely stupid slogan. I mean, I think sometimes we say it is, like, oh yeah, of course guns kill people. They do, but it's true that it's not just guns. It's not just that people have guns that we have these problems. So yeah, I guess I'd have to ask the same one back to you. What do you think is the drive? Why do you think that people care so much about guns? Why is it such a gut level issue here in the U.S.?
I think you alluded to it really well earlier. It's kind of in our DNA. Or at least the DNA of our country, right? I mean, we were a country that was born in rebellion.
Yeah,
Rebelling against what we considered to be a tyrannical government and trying to become independent from it. And so, because of that mentality, and I actually never thought of it before, but I think the expansion west, as you also mentioned, probably plays a significant role as well, as we went out to quote unquote tame the west or tame the wilds. It was kind of dangerous. It was the frontier. It was, in a lot of cases, you were on your own and you were battling the elements. There wasn't any development around you. It
yeah,
was obviously not, we obviously weren't living in caves. We had technology and we had,
right,
industry that we could build over time, but
yeah,
it wasn't already in place. So I think that is part of it. And then the other thing is, I think that once you have something, it's hard to give it up.
yeah,
And I think it's true. I think that's true for anything that we hold of value of any sort. I mean, if you look at drugs, like if you've done drugs before, it's kind of tough to give them up. Alcoholism. You look at anything, but you also look on the positive side of things. Like if you have a beautiful family, you don't necessarily want to go to war
sure,
because you know that you could potentially lose your family,
yeah,
or at least lose your life. Um, you don't want to give up a good job. So once we've experienced something and we've become accustomed to it or
yeah.
comfortable with it, it is hard to give up. So I think that's part of it as well, maybe.
Do you think that guns contribute to people feeling safe It seems to me that gun owners, it's a safety thing. I don't know if it is or not. I don't own a gun, but
Hmm. Well,
what do you
I
think?
mean, I think to answer that question, you would just have to look at gun sales, and when do they increase or when do they flatline?
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, they increased fairly dramatically when you saw all of the BLM riots last summer. Like you saw ammunition and gun sales go up fairly significantly.
Okay.
You see them go up anytime there's a serious anytime there's a serious debate or topic that seems to be gaining traction as far as gun control. You see people start stocking up on stuff. So I think you're right. There's some level of either A, safety, or B, there's some level of paranoia
Yeah.
or discomfort in what's going on around you, and so you just kind of want to prepare for the worst.
Right. That I think that brings us to a question we were talking about before. What, where do you think the line should be drawn? Like, if we're allowed to own weapons, where do you think is a logical place to draw that line? I think most people would say, you know, citizens shouldn't be able to have a nuclear arsenal or something like that.
Sure.
But that would be, I mean, I'd like to hear that perspective. I'd be interested. But but between muskets and nukes, where is that line and why?
Not to give too much of a cop out answer, so apologize in advance.
No worries.
But but number one, I'm not the authority on this. But then number two is, if I were to be the authority on this, I would lean more towards the side of it. It comes down to a more individual level than a cut and dry and here's the line in the sand.
Okay.
And my reasoning for that is, like I said before, I don't own a gun because I'm not comfortable. I don't have a level of proficiency in operating it to own and operate a gun. Like, that's just my personal judgment on that issue for me myself. But if you're going to devote the time and the energy and effort to becoming proficient, becoming comfortable, if you're going to be responsible and learn the consequences of not only owning the weapon, but also potentially using it and in what scenarios you use it, and you gain a level of confidence with it, I don't see a lot of harm in letting you own it.
Yeah.
So in other words, the softy soy boy over here, Michael Hansen, probably shouldn't own a gun, but my I don't want to call him a redneck because he's definitely not, but my father, who definitely enjoys that kind of recreation, and my mother as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm not sure if you know what front sight is over in Vegas. Are you familiar with front sight?
Is it a shooting range?
Kind of. Like I've never been there, so I wouldn't know how to explain it or describe it for you. But they offer a bunch of courses that are multi-day courses on different types of guns, different types of uses of those guns. Like, my parents like doing that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And so I don't own guns, but I have zero problem with people
Yeah.
like my parents who are passionate about it and who want to get good at using guns, owning them.
I heard. I was talking with somebody a while ago on Facebook, and they were making the argument that people should be able to own any weapon that the military should own. I thought that was interesting. Uh, I thought the internal logic there was interesting. It's like, if it really is the idea that people can resist the government if it becomes tyrannical, then it seems to make sense that people should be able to own whatever weapon. I don't know if that's feasible or not. But
Well, I mean, if you look at the Revolutionary War, I
yeah,
I wouldn't know, but I doubt we had the same firepower
yeah,
that Britain did. you know,
sure,
I don't think that we had that same level of firepower. I don't know again, I don't know if justifying ownership of certain weaponry based on what the military is able to use is viable or not.
Right.
I think it would be really fun seeing Billy Joe Bob driving around in a Panzer, though.
That'd be an alarming thing.
Yeah,
Very
but I mean,
entertaining.
yeah, a lot of the weaponry that the military has access to is scary.
Yeah, it is.
It has doomsday potential. I mean, you look
Yeah.
at nuclear bombs, obviously,
Right.
but then you look at things like little remote controlled drones that have IEDs attached to them, and like that's really
Yeah.
scary.
And
You can kill someone from a satellite. Like,
yeah, you can. It's scary, and that's something. I don't think it's totally stupid. This idea that you know that guns might have the or an armed populace. It might be good in the sense that you could resist some kind of tyranny. I think that there might be some sense to that. But of course, weapons have gotten so terrifying, like you're saying, that it gets weird. I
yeah.
think in a way, there might be a similar logic at play there with okay the sort of prisoner's dilemma logic where our military gets scarier and scarier weapons so that we can keep us safe against scarier and scarier weapons that are being developed. Of course, these weapons are now in themselves you know become more and more threatening. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think in America there's almost there might be this sort of prisoner's dilemma gun ownership thing where it's like everybody's got a gun. And so I think sometimes it's like I don't want to not have a gun. Everybody's packing. I can understand that logic here. It's like, yeah, I understand why you want to have a gun. If everybody's got a gun, you gotta have a gun. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always been a little bit of a freeloader. Never own a pool. Have neighbors with pools.
Yeah.
Never own a boat. Have friends with boats.
Right.
I'm kind of the same way with guns, maybe. Never own a gun, but have lots of friends who do.
Yeah. I
Here's a question for you. So, what level of arms possession or gun ownership is tolerable, or could you get comfortable with, and then why is that level something you could get comfortable with, if that makes sense?
okay. So what level do you think is I would be comfortable with?
Yeah. So, like, are you comfortable with people owning, like, I don't know, maybe someone can own a maximum of 2 guns, or this is the kind of
Yeah.
firepower you can pack, whatever the case may be.
I don't think I have a specific in mind. Not to be a cop outy here, but I guess I don't have this. I don't have an idea of like, okay, we would be better off if people could own, only this sort of gun or this thing. I think that there's some things that I think it would make sense to control heavily, like automatic weapons, things like that, assault rifle clips, kind of like high capacity magazines, that kind of thing. I read a study. I mean, it's one study, but they were talking about how it might make more sense to restrict who has the guns as opposed to what kind of guns they are. Something like background checks, further things like that. I think what I'd like to see is a reduction in violence. I don't know exactly what kind of gun ownership that would look like. I think my issue is that I want all the options to be on the table. I mean, I don't think that we're going to get rid of guns in America anytime soon or ever. I don't know. Uh, it's really a big part of the culture, and it's not that I think that no one should be able to use a gun, go hunting or go target shooting or something, but we've got some major issues, and I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like we got to be willing to look at something. I don't know. I'm being too vague on this one.
Sure.
I guess I'll say something that I don't like is okay. You live in Europe. Uh, People aren't as afraid of the cops. I go up to I see the police. I'm like, oh, good, the police are here. I think in America, when I see the police, I'm like, I need to. I don't know. I feel a little bit threatened. I mean, the atmosphere of police interaction in the U.S. is markedly different. I mean, in Germany, it's like, hello, sir, how you doing? Like in the U.S., I feel it's like hands where I can see them right away. I mean, and I don't know, and there's a hostility, there's a tension, I think, and I have to think that this tension comes from the fact that everybody's got a gun and they're afraid. They're coming to your car, one hand on their holster, just kind of watching out, like, I hope this guy doesn't have something. This police detective, when I was in Germany, this police detective told me this story. He said they pulled over this guy, and he puts a revolver out the window, and he says, "This is a prop gun." And he drops it, and he said, like, I don't know if that would work in the U.S. I don't know if he'd get away with doing something that dumb, I guess I don't know what the answer is. I think I would like controls on gun ownership, yeah, but I mean, would that fix all our problems with violence? No. There's major issues that need to be addressed. I guess I would just say that I don't feel like guns are making us safer. I don't know if getting rid of them would get rid of all our violence, but I just feel like it's not getting rid of it now. And so when I hear those arguments, it's like okay, good guy with a gun beats a bad guy with a gun. I feel skeptical about that because it seems like we have so many guns. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I guess to kind of turn the question back on myself, the way that I feel about them generally, and maybe I should have done a better job of explaining this or actually bringing some of these points up when I was describing my initial position earlier on, but I feel like for me, two things. I would compare drugs guns to drugs, and then I would compare guns to the issue of abortion. Let's actually start with that one first. So, if you asked somebody who was pro-choice and you asked somebody who is pro-life this question, I think the answer would be the same. Would you rather live in a world where abortion is legal but never happens, or in a world where it is illegal but it will happen occasionally? I think that everybody's answer is going to be the same on that. I think everyone's going to say, "Oh, I'd rather live in a world where it's legal, but it just doesn't need to happen."
Yeah.
I would say that for guns and violence, it would be the same. Would I rather live in a world where guns are legal and you can own as many as you want and there are no restrictions, but nobody gets killed by them?
Right.
Or a world where they're illegal, but every once in a while they'll be used as, weapons of death? I think everyone's answer is going to be the same. If I were to compare,
the violence isn't the end, isn't what you're going for, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not about whether or not no one who's pro-choice, for example, is saying yes, killing babies.
Yeah.
And
right.
in the same way that people who are pro-gun are not saying homicide.
Yeah, sure.
Like homicide, rah rah rah. No, that's not the thing. So I that's how I would say it compares to the issue of abortion, where if you ask that question, it's going to be the same no matter who you ask.
Yeah.
Now, the way that I would compare it to drugs, my personal position on drugs is there shouldn't be any penalties for possession.
Yeah.
There should probably be age restrictions on use, even for something like marijuana. Like everyone's saying, oh, maybe 21. I think that, call me a Quaker if you want to, but I think that the age should probably be closer to 26 because that's when your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. Anything before then, I mean, when you're when you're using marijuana, especially a lot of it, it impacts your decision-making abilities in the future.
Okay.
And so my thought is, let's maybe restrict the age
Yeah.
of drug use. And then as far as penalties, I think that the penalties of crimes committed against other people due to drugs or connected to drugs should actually be penalized more severely than they are. Right? So no penalties for possession, some age restrictions, or something that discourages people who probably shouldn't be using drugs yet from
Yeah.
making that decision. And then severely punishing people who harm other people connected to drugs. And I think that for gun ownership, it should probably be the same. Or at least I'd like it to be the same, where you don't get penalized for owning or possessing a gun, but there are some restrictions where you can't buy one unless you're not a violent felon or something of that nature, whatever that line
Yeah.
is. You're not using it as a minor unless you're accompanied by an adult and like you're being educated on it, kind of stuff. But then if guns are used in a way that harms another person, whether you shoot them or not,
Yeah.
whether if somebody is harmed or you commit a crime with a firearm, I think that the penalties should be much more severe than they are. At least that's a world that I would like to live in.
I think, yeah, that makes some sense. I think, and I agree with you on decriminalization of drug possession, by the way. Uh, I think, what's interesting, what I'd like to get into, before we finish up, is try to understand the debate emotionally. What are people feeling about this? And I don't mean just me and you, because I think sometimes we're going to have perspectives that aren't
Representative.
the same. Yeah, aren't representative, right? Like we'd have different feelings than most people would on our side or our side. But I think I feel that guns is maybe part of. I might make the argument that it's part of this argument about the social contract. Like basically, like how much do we value individual liberty over, the collective, individual versus the collective kind of thing. I think America is probably one of the most individualistic countries on earth. As far as our ethos, I mean, we really are about the individual, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. I think individualism can be good. I'm an individual. But,
Sure. I want my
uh,
interests looked after.
I want
or
my,
looked out for.
yeah, right. I feel like the left thinks of it as, I mean, not everybody, but I think that the general idea is that it's this thing that people are attached to, like this liberty that people are attached to having, regardless of the cost to others. I think is probably
Okay.
how I'd sum up. Do you think that sounds right as far as like what does the left think? I don't know.
I would say from the right's perspective, like how we perceive the left on the issue is two things come to mind. Number one is the guns are the instrument of the cancer that we all agree on. Right? We all agree that violence is bad. We all agree that homicide or injuring other people or threatening other people is bad. And I think we all agree that guns are a prevalent instrument in that type of behavior. But I think a lot of people on the right look at the left and say, you really think that restricting guns is going to reduce the problem? And that's what they're skeptical of. Just because you make guns illegal, like we can now 3D print guns. You know, if you have access to a 3D printer, you can make your own gun. And so, do you really feel like the level of violence or the level of homicide, these types of things will actually go down? So that's skepticism number one. And then skepticism number two is, we talked about this before, but all right, I am concerned that you want to take away guns, or I'm concerned about your position, but I'm more concerned about the motivations for the position. You know, so in the instance of guns, okay, you want to take my guns away. That kind of bothers me, but what I'm more bothered about is, why don't you want me to own a gun if I'm going to use it correctly? Is it because you want to oppress me in some way, or like, that's kind of the thought process.
I'm, this is a more general kind of sci-fi thing I'm getting into here, but I think sometimes I'm worried that as technology gets better, it's like individuals can get more dangerous. Like let's say, like you were just talking about the 3D printing a gun, and I think that's a super valid point. I think there's a lot to discuss there. It's like technology is growing and our access to power, to technological power, is increasing, and I think that there's ways that could come about in which an individual would have, terrifying power. I mean, imagine if for just to make a weird example, but like if genetic engineering continues, let's say somebody has a home lab and is somehow able to, you know, engineer some kind of super smallpox or something. I don't know, but this general principle I think holds, where it's like the crazier our technology gets, it almost seems like it calls for further levels of control and surveillance, where it's like we're really afraid of lone actors now. And I think that that's been a major driver behind this force of surveillance. Like, okay, we got to watch everybody because somebody could, get a bomb and do this. It's like, I don't know if that was as much of a concern back in the day.
That's actually really cool. I think you're right. And that opens up Pandora's box as far as issues that we could discuss, when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to privacy. And I've got my phone in front of me, and there's no doubt that I've mentioned a couple buzzwords that probably set off an alarm somewhere in DC or wherever, so I'm probably on some no-fly list now. But I've said gun 50 times in the last 43 minutes or something. So
Yeah, I don't. I think that I wonder sometimes. I think with the American right, especially, and I don't know if this is true. I don't know if this is true of conservatives generally, internationally. I think that there's this a skepticism of collective control of the individual. Like I don't even want to be part of your club, like that kind of feeling. Like, to the degree that I'm forced to participate in, paying taxes and being involved in the country, like, leave me alone. Like, I want to do my own thing. I don't know. And I wonder sometimes if guns, if you were to think of, who was it, like Lenin or something said, like, all political power flows from the barrel of a gun. I can't remember who said that. But it's almost like a bit of sovereignty. It's like I'm taking a bit of the power to enact violence from the state. And, for Democrats, left-leaning people, it's like, no, the state, we should be a collective. Power should be controlled by the state. And then it seems like on the right, it's like, no. I want power to be diffuse. And even the power to violence. I think it's interesting.
yeah, I think that's true. And you brought up something. For some reason, my mind went into like the ideas of isolationism and secessionism. I think that on the right, that is driven more by fear on the negative side, and then a sense of autonomy, obviously. on the more positive side. Where on the left, I think it's on the negative side, driven more by disgust. You know, like
What is driven more discussed?
um that idea of isolationism or secessionism on the left. Like you've brought up before, like the purity tests, right? So the desire to disassociate from society on the left is driven more by disgust than fear, which is more of the right, you know. So I don't know.
I I think that would be true if people were talking about, let's have California, Oregon and Washington secede. I think it would be driven like that. It'd be like, I'm so sick of this in this country we're part of. I don't think it would be necessarily like fear. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, do you have anything else?
I think that there's a lot to talk about, but I think we'll wrap it up for now. Yeah.
Sounds good. It's always a pleasure, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Have a good one.
All right, you too.